Emily thought she was traveling alone, sitting quietly on a train, heading to a memorial for a mother she barely knew. But then a stranger sat beside her and said, "You look just like her." What followed was a conversation that changed how Emily understood her mother, herself, and what it really means to say goodbye. Stay until the end. The story is about hidden histories, unexpected connections, and how sometimes the people who know our loved ones best are the ones we never meet until we need them most. The train pulled out of Penn Station at exactly 7:03 a.m., but Emily Walsh barely noticed. She sat by the window, her forehead resting against the cold glass as the New York skyline blurred into gray concrete, then into the slow sprawl of suburban tracks. The soft hum of the train filled the cabin, quiet enough to hear the pages of newspapers turning, the muted beeps of phones, and the occasional cough from a commuter. Her seatmate hadn't shown up, leaving the spot next to her empty, her coat draped over it like a shield. Emily clutched a small, worn leather satchel on her lap. Inside, a folded obituary clipping torn from the local paper back in Bridgeport, where her mother had died 2 days ago. Margaret Walsh, 57, passed quietly at home, survived by her daughter, Emily Walsh. That was the first time Emily had seen her name next to her mother's in years. The first time it had felt official. The first time she realized there was no one left to call and say, "What the hell am I supposed to do now?" The city disappeared behind her as the train pushed north. Outside, bare trees whipped past, early spring, the leaves still shy. The Hudson River glinted faintly through the branches. Emily blinked against the tears threatening to surface again. She'd promised herself she wouldn't cry here. Not on the train. Not in public. But the pressure of the past few days, the call from the neighbor who found her mother, the rushed arrangements, the quiet, sterile voice of the funeral director saying, "We'll keep it simple," was heavier than she expected. So now here she was, 27, alone on the Northeast Regional, on her way to a memorial she didn't know how to feel about, for a woman she hadn't seen in almost 5 years. Her mother's voice was already fading in her mind, soft, stern, distant. They hadn't spoken much since the last fight, the one about money, or her job, or maybe it was about her moving to the city. They all blurred together now. All she remembered clearly was slamming the door. And never going back. Emily sniffed quietly, wiping at her eyes with her sleeve. The train rocked gently as it passed through New Rochelle, then Stamford. She glanced around the car, people in business suits scrolling through emails, students with earbuds in, an older man in a Red Sox hat reading the sports section. No one was paying attention to her. Thank God. She leaned back, exhaling slowly, and let her eyes drift closed. It was the voice that made her open them again. Soft, warm, familiar in a way that startled her. "You look just like her." Emily turned sharply. Seated across the aisle, now leaning slightly toward her, was an older woman, maybe in her mid-60s, with short silver hair tucked neatly behind her ears, a soft navy scarf wrapped around her neck. Emily blinked. "Sorry?" The woman smiled gently, as if she hadn't just dropped a grenade into the quiet of Emily's morning. "Margaret." The name hit Emily like a punch. She stared. "You knew her?" The woman nodded. "Very well. A long time ago." Emily's mouth went dry. How do you know who I am?" The woman's smile softened even more. "Because you looked just like her when she was your age." Emily swallowed hard, gripping the leather strap of her bag tighter. I don't understand." The woman glanced out the window briefly, as if measuring the moment, then looked back. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. I saw your obituary clipping when you opened your bag. Anne?" I recognized her immediately. Emily felt her heart thud painfully in her chest. She hadn't even realized she'd taken the clipping out. The woman extended a hand gently. "I'm Helen. Helen Carter." Emily hesitated, then shook it. "Emily." "I know," Helen said quietly. "I knew you when you were little." Emily blinked. "What?" Helen smiled, a little wistful. "Your mom and we were friends. A long time ago. Before you were born." Emily stared at her, throat suddenly tight, the noise of the train fading into a dull, indistinct hum. She never mentioned you. Helen nodded, unsurprised. That sounds like Margaret. Emily swallowed, unsure what to say. The train slowed as it approached Bridgeport, her stop. The memorial. The last place she wanted to be. She looked back at Helen, 100 questions burning in her chest, none of them fully formed yet. But all she managed to say was, "Would you sit with me?" Helen smiled. Of course. And just like that, the empty seat beside Emily wasn't empty anymore. The train slid out of Bridgeport, now headed deeper into Connecticut, weaving through salt marshes and quiet towns Emily barely registered. She hadn't moved since Helen sat beside her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that felt strangely familiar, even though Emily had no memory of this woman, or maybe she did, buried in the haze of childhood birthday parties and church potlucks. She glanced sideways. Helen was looking out the window, her scarf pulled a little tighter around her neck as if bracing for something colder ahead. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "So, how did you know my mom?" Helen smiled faintly, still watching the trees blur past. "We met at college. Smith, 1983. She was the first person I met who wasn't afraid to cut her own hair." Emily laughed unexpectedly, the sound catching her off guard. "That sounds accurate." Helen chuckled softly. "She cut mine too. Once. On a dare. Worst bob I've ever had." Emily could almost see it, her mother, in her 20s, reckless and bold, scissors in hand. Not the tight-lipped woman Emily remembered, with her perfectly ironed blouses and carefully clipped garden roses. "I didn't know she went to Smith." Helen glanced at her. "She didn't tell you?" Emily shook her head. "She didn't tell me much." Helen sighed gently. "That was Margaret. Guarded. Even when she loved you, she didn't know how to say it sometimes." Emily swallowed hard, her eyes suddenly stinging. Helen seemed to sense it and softened her voice further. "She was different then. Before everything." Emily turned to her fully now. "Before what?" Helen paused, then looked down at her hands, folded neatly in her lap. "Before your father left. Before you. Before she settled." Emily blinked. Her mother had always been a constant, if distant, figure in her life, sharp, precise, practical. The idea that there had been a time she was anything else felt disorienting. "She didn't talk about any of that." Helen nodded. "She wouldn't. She was proud. And stubborn." Emily laughed quietly, wiping at the corner of her eye. "Yeah. That I knew." Helen smiled sadly. "She loved you. I know she didn't always know how to show it, but she did." Emily looked down at her bag, at the folded obituary still tucked inside. "She stopped calling after I moved out. After I didn't go back for Christmas." Helen placed a gentle hand on Emily's arm. "She was waiting for you to call her too, you know." Emily swallowed, her throat tight. "It didn't feel like that." "I know." The train rocked gently, the rhythm of the tracks almost like a heartbeat between them. Helen leaned back, looking out the window again. "Your mom was fearless when we were younger. She wanted to travel the world. She was going to open a bookstore in Vermont. She had this dream of living in a cabin by the mountains." Emily blinked, stunned. She never mentioned any of that." Helen smiled faintly. "She let a lot of things go. We all do, I guess." Emily swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "Did you two keep in touch?" Helen sighed. "For a while. But then life happens. Jobs. Marriage. You. And we drifted." She paused, then added, "But I always kept track of her." Quietly. From a distance. Emily nodded slowly, absorbing every word. The train slowed again as it neared New Haven, the announcements crackling overhead in a too cheerful voice. Emily stared out at the platform as they passed through. For years, she'd thought of her mother as a fixed point, someone defined by absence, by what she didn't say, by the space she left after Emily left home. But now, here was a version of her she had never even imagined: reckless, funny, ambitious, daring. A woman who cut her friend's hair badly in dorm bathrooms and dreamed of mountain cabins. Emily exhaled shakily. "Thank you," she said quietly. Helen looked over at her. "For what?" Emily smiled faintly, eyes still glassy. "For reminding me she was a person." Helen squeezed her arm gently, then leaned back again, letting Emily sit with that. The train rolled northward, the morning light slanting through the windows, and for the first time in days, Emily felt something other than numb. Not quite peace. But maybe curiosity. About who her mother had been. And about who Emily might be, now that she knew there was more to the story. The train cut quietly through Old Saybrook, the marshes stretching out on either side like soft, endless blankets of green. Emily watched the blurred horizon through the window, her reflection ghosting faintly in the glass, two versions of herself, layered, the one who thought she knew her mother, and the one beginning to realize she never did. Helen shifted beside her, adjusting her scarf, then cleared her throat softly. "There's something I should tell you." Emily turned toward her. The tone in Helen's voice was different now, lower, more careful. "What is it?" Helen hesitated, then looked directly at Emily. "Your mother and I, we were more than just friends." Emily frowned slightly. "More?" Helen smiled faintly, nodding. We were together." Emily blinked, her mind trying to catch up. "Together, like?" Helen nodded again, this time with a little more certainty. "Yes. We were in love." The words landed with a soft, but undeniable weight. Emily stared at her, mouth slightly open. I didn't know." Helen let out a breathy laugh, not amused, but filled with years of distance and acceptance. "No. I imagine you wouldn't." She looked out the window for a long moment, then added, "She never told anyone, really. It was the 80s. We were at Smith. It was easier to call it friendship." Emily swallowed hard. Her mother, the woman who never talked about relationships, who never dated after Emily's father left, who barely spoke about love at all, had carried this entire life Emily never knew about. Why didn't she tell me?" Helen smiled sadly. "Margaret was always private. Guarded. She thought she had to be." She sighed, then added, her voice softer, "And maybe she thought that part of her was over when she married your father." Emily shook her head slowly, trying to process it. All those years, her mother alone in their house, pruning the rose bushes, cooking dinner in silence, never bringing anyone home. Did you stay in touch after?" Helen nodded faintly. "For a little while. But it was complicated. She wanted something safe. Something she could explain. And then, she had you." She smiled at Emily. "She loved you fiercely, you know." Emily swallowed again, the lump in her throat growing. "It never felt like that." Helen squeezed her hand gently. "Sometimes love is quieter than we want it to be." The train rocked gently as they passed over a narrow bridge. Emily stared down at their hands, Helen's, soft and lined with age, hers, trembling slightly. "She never remarried," Emily said quietly. Helen shook her head. "No. I don't think she ever really moved on." Emily looked at her sharply. "From you?" Helen smiled, a little wistful, a little sad. "From all of it. From the part of herself she put away." Emily leaned back, exhaling shakily, her mind a flurry of images, her mother, standing by the sink, staring out the window. Her mother, closing the door to her bedroom without a word. Her mother, turning down invitations, refusing to talk about the past. All those silences now meant something else. Helen watched her carefully. "I don't mean to upset you." Emily shook her head quickly. "No. You're not. I thought I knew her." Helen nodded, understanding completely. "We all think we know our parents. She smiled. And then, sometimes, strangers on trains tell us otherwise. They both laughed quietly, the tension easing just a little. The conductor's voice crackled overhead, next stop, Providence. Emily looked at her ticket, then back at Helen. I get off at Boston. Helen nodded. Me too. Emily smiled faintly, then asked, Why are you going? Helen looked at her, then said simply, To say goodbye. Emily's breath caught. Of course. Helen hadn't just recognized Margaret in the clipping. She was going to the memorial too. You're coming to the service? Helen nodded softly. Yes. Emily felt her chest tighten again. But this time, it wasn't grief alone. It was something else. A strange, unexpected gratitude. That someone else had loved her mother deeply. That someone else carried her memory too. That Emily wasn't as alone in this as she thought. The train curved northward, the landscape opening up as they crossed into Rhode Island. And for the first time since she boarded in New York, Emily looked out at the passing towns and didn't feel like she was running toward something she couldn't face. She was moving towards someone, with her mother's story now layered, complicated, but somehow fuller. More human. More real. Just like her. The train hissed softly as it pulled into Boston South Station. Passengers stood, collecting their bags, voices rising and falling in the usual commuter rhythm. But Emily stayed seated, her hands resting on the worn leather strap of her satchel, her eyes fixed on Helen, who stood beside her in the aisle. Ready? Helen asked gently. Emily nodded, swallowing hard. As I'll ever be. They moved together through the narrow corridor, stepping onto the platform where the city stretched high and bright above them, the morning air cool and sharp with the scent of rain that hadn't quite fallen yet. Emily exhaled slowly. Boston had never felt like home. But neither had anywhere else. A car was waiting for them, a simple black sedan arranged by the funeral home. Helen insisted they ride together. In the back seat, Emily stared out the window as the streets of the Back Bay blurred past brownstones, coffee shops, joggers weaving through traffic like they had somewhere important to be. Helen sat quietly beside her, the same calm presence she had been for the last 4 hours. Finally, Emily broke the silence. Do you think she would have wanted me there? Helen turned, her eyes soft but certain. Yes. Emily bit her lip, looking down at her hands. Even after everything? Helen placed a warm hand on hers. Especially after everything. Emily nodded, tears threatening again. But she didn't wipe them away this time. The service was small. Just as her mother had requested. A few old friends from work. 2 neighbors. A woman Emily didn't recognize who introduced herself afterward as someone her mother had volunteered with at the library. And Helen. Emily stood near the back as the minister spoke softly about Margaret's love for books, her garden, and her fierce independence. But none of those words meant as much as the ones Helen had given Emily on the train. The image of her mother laughing in a dorm bathroom, cutting someone's hair. Dreaming of a bookstore in Vermont. Loving quietly, even when it hurt. After the service, as people began to drift out, Helen touched Emily's arm. Would you come with me? Emily nodded. Helen led her to the side garden of the small chapel, where a simple memorial bench had been placed beneath a magnolia tree just beginning to bloom. Helen sat down, patting the space beside her. Emily joined her. For a while, neither spoke. The air was cool, filled with birdsong and the faint rustle of petals falling. Then Helen reached into her bag and pulled out a small, faded photograph. She handed it to Emily. This was us. Smith College. 1985. Emily stared at it. Her mother, barely 20, smiling wide, her arm thrown over Helen's shoulder. Both of them in flannel shirts, standing in front of a bookstore with a for sale sign. Her throat tightened. She was happy. Helen nodded, smiling through tears. Very. Emily traced her mother's face in the photo with her fingertip, as if trying to memorize this new version of her. Then she looked at Helen. Thank you. Helen squeezed her hand. You deserve to know her. Emily swallowed hard. I think I'm just starting to. They sat together in the quiet, the magnolia petals drifting down like slow, thoughtful snow. For the first time in years, Emily didn't feel angry or abandoned. She just felt connected. Not only to the woman her mother had been, but to the woman Emily was still becoming, someone who understood that people are not just the silences they leave behind, but also the stories they carry, hidden, waiting to be told. Finally, Emily stood. Helen stood too. They hugged, not out of politeness, but out of something real. Something earned. Later that afternoon, Emily walked alone along the Charles River, the photograph tucked safely in her bag. She didn't know what came next. She didn't have answers to all the questions. But for the first time since she got the call, she felt like the goodbye wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. A chance to carry forward the parts of her mother that no one else had shown her. And maybe, one day, to sit across from a stranger and say, "You look just like her." Sometimes, the goodbyes we fear the most aren't endings at all, but invitations to understand, to forgive, and to carry someone forward in a new way. If this story moved you, leave a like, subscribe, and share it with someone whose story you're still learning.